In my work with targeted parents, as a evaluator, reunification therapist, coach, I've heard them make mistakes, and that's where I come up with 5 common dilemmas or catch-22s. And they just are put in these no-win situations where they're trying to find that balance, that sweet spot of where I can be in a place where it's going to be like, this is where it makes sense. I'll do this, and it never is, there's not a sweet spot. Anytime they are over on one side of the dilemma, then there's a counter argument made about, well, you're not doing this. The first of the 5 common dilemmas is the dilemma of overparenting versus underparenting. And that is when a parent is trying to find a way to be involved as a parent and be able to discipline, be able to be in the child's life, without the child feeling like the parent is withdrawn and isolated because they're responding to the rejection. For example, at a soccer game, the parent shows up and the alienating parent and the alienated child says, "We told you not to come to our games because it's so upsetting when you're there. Can't you just give the child some time so that they can just enjoy their game?" And you respond to that and say, "Okay, I'll give the child some time and I won't show up at the games." Then you stop showing up at the games, and then that becomes a fact pattern to accuse you of being disinterested in the child's life and that you're more interested in your own life or maybe your new family with your new stepchildren and their extracurricular activities. The second dilemma is regarding co-parenting, and there's 2 different predominant models in the co-parenting. One is the parallel co-parenting model, which is to try to not cooperate and engage and communicate a lot with your co-parent. And the other one, as I'm saying, is a more cooperative, where there's not a lot of fixed rules and boundaries. You get to share and talk with each other a lot. And again, these parents get into a situation where they're always criticized of being too rigid for setting up their own rules and their own custodial time and not sharing information. Or if they do share information with the co-parent and the child, then that gets sabotaged, and say the itinerary that they had for the extended parenting time seems to be too attractive. So then the alienated parent will set up competing activities so the child will want to resist going. The third dilemma is approaching the problem of alienation through a conciliation approach versus a litigious approach. If you try to do conciliation and try to be cooperative, and for example, they suggest a cooling off period. Let's just give it a break. I had a parent who took 12 weeks based on a GAL recommendation to not see the child or the children, and then start reunification counseling with me. And then that parent came into the counseling, and the children were even more distant and not even wanting to look at their dad, say hi to their dad, and they actually left the counseling session early. And the dad realized in agony as he's crying when the kids left that the kids had turned more cold toward him because he took the GAL's recommendation of just give it some time. And parental alienation, time is the enemy. You hire an attorney and you start filing motions to try to address the problem, then you're seen as being litigious and controlling, and you're just distressing the family out by all this litigation. The fourth dilemma is when you're challenged with whether you confront the false narrative in the child or others, or you just try to let it be and just hope it will go away and not confront it because you're afraid of challenging the child, and the child then experiences shame for having false memories or engaging in a false narrative. I call it confabulations. People will say, well, the children are lying. Well, lying is an intentional act that you do to deceive someone. Confabulation is when you're trying to cope with psychological abuse and the loyalty bind, and you're just saying things as a way of coping with it rather than having the intention to deceive. These parents get into a situation of not knowing whether to actively challenge the false narrative so that it doesn't continue to grow, or if they withdraw and to avoid shaming the child or criticizing the child for the false narrative and the false facts, then they end up making the child feel bad. The final and fifth dilemma is when, if you follow that recommendation of being open-hearted versus being defensive and insular, then you make yourself open to being hurt and disappointed a lot as a rejected parent, because at one moment the child is full of life and joy and they're engaged with you and you're excited, and then they go and spend a week with the alienating parent, and then they come back, they resist and they refuse, they're shut down, they spend time in their room, you try to get them out, and they say they hate you and they don't want to spend any time with you. And then what happens if you're vulnerable and open-hearted? You're heartbroken. You're just heartbroken by that. So a lot of rejected parents can't take the up and down, and so they end up becoming more closed-hearted, and then they come across as cold and aloof and as though they don't care. And so again, it's this dilemma of never having a safe place as a targeted parent to know how to respond. I think, like special needs children, like if you have a child who's diagnosed with autism, the way you build resilience is to educate and to create awareness to help the targeted parent understand what's happening to their child, and be able to then provide them smart responses and adjustments that are adaptive to the situation. Now, knowing that nothing that they can do or not do can stop the progression of alienation. I look at alienation as like a psychological tumor that's fed by the attachment with their alienating parent. And so if that attachment doesn't get fixed with the alienating parent, nothing a targeted parent can do can stop the progression. So you can help the parent respond with compassion and be smart and adaptive, but that can be effective in a mild case that maybe is moving to moderate, but if it moves from moderate to severe, nothing a targeted parent does is going to stop it. And that's when, the resiliency is that you need help. You need to bring in an attorney if you can afford it. You need to bring experts in. That's where I come in as a coach to help and provide support. And then you might have to get some judicial overview or do a significant intervention where there might be a change of custody and a no contact order with the alienating parent. You start out with low levels of coping and adaptation and giving the targeted parent support so they understand what's going on. And then depending on how it progresses, you may have to do something that's more of an intervention. There are times when targeted parents suffer from professionals making what we call a fundamental attribution error, meaning that they falsely attribute the children's behavior into making it about the targeted parent's behavior rather than the alienating parent's behavior. So for example, if a child is scared of going to parenting time with the targeted parent, the fundamental attribution error is they assume that the child is fearful of the targeted parent. But actually what is happening, the child is fearful of disappointing the alienating parent. So the fear and resistance is to stay attached and remain loyal to the alienating parent. So the naive professional who doesn't understand what I call the trigonometry of parental alienation, and they only understand the arithmetic of abuse and neglect, they think that the alienating parent's a protective parent, and then you have a child who's resisting and refusing because you have an unfit, dangerous parent. And that's bad math. You actually have an alienating parent who's having a child who's being psychologically abused, and they're not identifying it because for them it's trigonometry and they've never been taught that. There's a lot of backlash about parental alienation and how it's being used to blame mothers who are protecting their children, in actual cases, let's say, of domestic violence. So they want to take the arsenal away from all these battering domestic terrorists, and they want to remove the defense of parental alienation as a way of protecting victims of domestic violence. Little do they know that they're actually, in doing so, victimizing children and targeted parents from a legitimate problem. Parental alienation is a form of family violence. So little do they know we're working on the same team, trying to help children and hold parents accountable who are weaponizing children for power and control and manipulating them and poisoning their minds and cutting off average range parents from access. So we're on the same team. And it's just so sad that it's so divisive. They don't understand the child is a victim of psychological abuse, and they're incredibly stuck in this loyalty bind. And it's very, very difficult for them to try to traverse it. Sometimes targeted parents don't understand what's happening to them, and therefore they don't have a lot of understanding sometimes and compassion on what's happening to their children. And so when they personalize the child resisting and refusing, saying hateful things, they can respond in angry, defensive ways. And that can lead to another mistake, which is thinking that punishment and increased discipline is going to somehow make it go away. It usually doesn't work because you end up increasing the punishment, and I've worked with a lot of rejected parents who've done extreme things out of frustration, and that plays right in to the playbook of the alienating parent's false narrative of, see, this parent is unfit, they're abusive, they're neglectful, and it ends up ultimately not working. Because of their own frustration or exasperation of trying to work with the child themselves directly, they begin to enlist family and friends, try to get Uncle Steve to have a conversation with the incorrigible child, or maybe she'll listen to grandma, trying to criticize the child and get the child to behave and be more civil and more corrigible. So then the child is now feeling all this shame and guilt for having rejected a loving parent, and they're in this kind of a, what I call a psychic cage fighting inside them. And now they have the whole village thinking they're a bad child. And that plays into the kind of the hostile tribal environment that sometimes parental alienation creates. And then the children don't want to be with the rival hostile tribe. Another mistake is when they begin, out of frustration, retaliating against the alienating parent. Because it's the human condition to want to seek revenge, do a payback. And so over time, again, rejected parents get exasperated, and so they end up, taking extended parenting time that's not court-ordered, kind of saying that I'm going to get parenting time back from when you refused it last summer or last month. And so they end up then being seen as not following the court order. So it doesn't really work when you start sending snarky emails and and all that, and our family wizard is tracking it, and then you end up being seen as this really angry, agitated parent that then can be used against you in court. The fifth common mistake that targeted parents engage in is when they become angry and obstinate to professionals involved in the case. They feel like that counselor is buying into the false narrative, or they just go in loaded for bear. The first time they have an appointment with the counselor, they come across as just really angry and agitated and accusatory. And so then again, that can play right into the false narrative as this parent is an angry, agitated, unrealistic person who just talks right over you. And I think that they need a hand, they need a lifeline, they need support, they need education, they need coaching so that they know what they're dealing with and they can prevent the best version of themselves.